Hello, Lloyd Ruhl, aka MegaBlitzz. In today's video, we're going to be ranking all the decks for the Louisville Regionals. Now, with the Stellar Crown cards being out for quite some time online and having the Dortmund and Joinville Regionals where these cards were legal, we finally have some kind of real in-person data to go off of for this ranking. And I'm really excited to kind of go over and rank all these decks and talk about each one of them, because I'll also be attending the Louisville Regionals, and I'm really excited. I've been testing a couple different decks, and I've narrowed it down to 2 decks that I might be playing for the Louisville Regionals. So, without further ado, let's start talking about some of these decks. I would like to start off with some of the D tier decks to kind of get them out of the way a little bit. Any Arc pile, except maybe Arc Armor Rouge, I'm going to have to put in D tier. Arc Armor Rouge, maybe C tier. You can have some couple cool plays you can make. But overall, unfortunately, I'm going to have to put Arc, just piles in general, in the D tier. They're not really in a good spot right now, with a lot of the Stage 2 decks being very relevant, like Gardevoir, Dragapult, Charizard, things like that. A couple other decks that I would like to just kind of toss into the D tier, unfortunately. I'm going to have to put Dialga also in the D tier. It just doesn't feel as powerful it did kind of back in Indianapolis, where Chen Pao was really running the format at the time, and you were hitting them for weakness and kind of things of that nature. But overall, not a lot of the other decks are going to be in D tier here. I do have to put future hands or just future box decks in D tier. They're just not really hitting the matchups they want. They don't want to see Charizards. They don't want to see Dragapults. They don't want to see really Gardevoirs that much. So for that reason, it's got to be in D tier. If you hit Lugias, you're having a great day. But if you hit Charizard, you're just going to get farmed, and it feels really bad. A couple Lost piles as well I would like to put in D tier. Just Lost Pults and Lost Dragapult, or sorry, Lost Tina and Lost Pult. Lost Tina is not the deck it once was with Roxanne, kind of being your best card, I guess, out after a rotation. You don't have the Path to the Peak element anymore. The format isn't really in your favor as much. You just don't have a lot of the pieces. Battle VIP Pass really made that deck shine, and now you just don't really have that. You have to hit Nest Balls to get Tinas, as opposed to Battle VIP Pass, where you could just get all the Pokemon that you would want in those first couple turns. So that's why it's in D tier. Lost Pult is just the worst way to play Dragapult. Maybe Dragapult Xatu, but I've had more luck with Dragapult Xatu than I have Lost Bolt, in personal opinion. But it is what it is. Speaking of Dragapult Xatu, we're going to put that in C tier. It's not a bad deck. I just feel like, once again, it's not the best way to play Dragapult right now. We've kind of seen that in the Dortmund regionals with Ryuku Okada just winning the entire event with his innovation of Dragapult. And even Dragapult Pidgeot is still a better deck than Lost Pult and Dragapult Pidgeot, I feel like, in my opinion. So for that reason, it has to go in the C tier. A couple other decks I would like to toss in C tier. We got Lost Sablezard, Turbo Lost Box, do have to go into C tier. And Lost Sablezard and Lost Paradox, or just Turbo Lost Box, are kind of in the similar boat, in the sense that, like, Lost Sablezard is definitely the best version of Lost Box to play right now. But just with Kira running around, Regidrogo being a thing, you have a lot of decks playing Iron Hands, like Lugia's playing Iron Hands. You have a couple other decks as well playing Iron Hands. Chen Pao plays Iron Hands. It's not very common right now with Chen Pao, but Lugia's playing Iron Hands, which definitely kind of hinders you a little bit. Miraidon plays Iron Hands now. And you're not really hitting the matchups that you want to hit. You're going to face a lot of Charizards and a lot of Dragapults. And Dragapult is just going to farm all of your Comfeys to oblivion. They're just going to Phantom Dive, put 6 there, put 1 over, and then 1, and then 5 there. And then it's going to be a disaster, and it's not going to be a good time, unfortunately. But a couple other decks for CT here. We got the Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon with the Noivern deck. I feel like that deck was really only good for the Baltimore Regionals. It kind of fell off after that. I don't really expect it to do super well going forward. I feel like it was just kind of like that one-time call deck. But it's still a play that you can make, and it's not a bad deck by any means. It's just, I don't think it's going to do very well. For record, S tier decks are the decks I expect to see in top 8. A tier, I expect to maybe get 1 or 2 into top 8. B tier, top 16. C tier, make day 2. A couple of these can make day 2. And D tier, just don't play it, or 1 might make day 2, possibly. Couple other decks that I would just like to toss into the C tier. I feel like Ancient Box is in C tier. Unfortunately, you're just not really going to hit the matchups you want. There's a lot of Charizard, there's a lot of Dragapult, and there's a lot of Gardevoir, which aren't very great matchups for you overall, unfortunately. So for those reasons, Ancient Box is just going to be down here in the C tier. I would also like to put Roaring Moon in the C tier. I feel like Roaring Moon isn't a bad deck. I actually feel like it's probably the best C tier deck you could play. But it's just kind of one of those, once again, you're not hitting great matchups. You have the Frenzy Gouging to KO Dragapult, and then they just farm you with Phantom Dive and the extra damage counters, and Dusknoir is a thing, and Dusclops is a thing, and they can just kind of pick off your Roaring Moons after your Frenzy Gouging, which doesn't feel super great. And even Lugia running around. Mist Energy is a card. So, like, just Roaring Moon isn't in a great spot like it was for Worlds. So, unfortunately, Roaring Moon down here in the C tier. Chien-Pao also in the C tier, but once again, I'm going to put it next to Roaring Moon. I feel like Chien-Pao has some good plays. You can get the matchups. You can win the Dragapult matchup. You can win the Charizard matchup. The Lugia matchup is not free per se, but very favorable. The Gardevoir matchup's pretty handy. So, like, you have a lot of these matchups that you can do and you can win, but you just have to commit a lot. And a good Chien-Pao player will take Chien-Pao far, I feel like, going into Louisville. But an average Chien-Pao player will not. I feel like if you put this into, like, Jared Grimes or Lucas Zing or any of those that have been playing a lot of Chien-Pao, they will do well with it if they decide to play that. But other than that, Chien-Pao it gets farmed by a couple other things. I feel like you have a really bad time into Goldango. You have a pretty, like I said, it's doable for the Dragapult, Charizard, and Gardevoir matchups. It's just kind of tough sometimes. The control matchup can be kind of tough. Iron Thorns is a little awkward. Stall is a little bit awkward as well. So there's just a lot of matchups that are just kind of tough for you. If Gudra's playing like if Regidrago's playing Hisui and Gudra, that also kind of makes it a little awkward as well. Raging Bolt, I feel like it's just the better aggressive deck in the format right now. So going forward with a couple more decks here, I would like to put Goldango in the B tier. I think Goldango is not a bad pick for the regional. You have a lot of draw power with a bunch of cards. You can make a lot of cool plays into a lot of different matchups. Once again, kind of the same problem Chien-Pao has as Charizard and Dragapult and Gardevoir can be a little awkward sometimes, but you also have the Palkia in the deck, which can kind of help. So a lot of the decks are playing Air Zero Underdepths. Like, man, Top VPN just wanted me to buy more stuff. With a lot of the decks right now, like Palkia and Miraidon and stuff, playing that Air Zero Underdepths, you can kind of hit harder with your own Palkia, which can be pretty nice. If they have if they have 8 Pokemon on their bench with that stadium out, you can have that option, which I think is pretty cool. A couple other decks into the B tier here. We got just Pidgeot Control going into the B tier. Pidgeot Control is one of those decks where I feel like it's not the best way to play Control right now. I feel like if you're going to play Control, just play Stall. Quad Stall feels like a lot better deck going into Louisville with Charizard being really relevant. You have a couple cool things you can do into the Dragapult matchup. You have a couple cool things you can do in the Gardevoir matchup as well. And Palkia as well on top of that. So I just feel like, once again, Pidgeot Control isn't the best deck to be playing right now as far as control deck goes, but I feel like if you've been playing a lot of Pidgeot Control and you know how the matchups work and you know how the deck functions, I'm thinking of people like All Out Blitzel and people like that, then just play Pidgeot Control because you know what you're doing. But if you haven't been playing Pidgeot Control, do not recommend just kind of picking it up and being like, I'm going to play Pidgeot Control to Louisville. Don't do that. That's not a good idea. A couple other B-tier decks I would like to toss in. Miraidon. Miraidon, it's kind of clunky right now. I think the Mewtwo EX feels really bad. If you start with it, it's really awkward. You have to, like, attach plus rescue board to get it out of the active, and then you've already attached for turn, and I get why they're playing it. They want to hit harder with Raikou V. You don't have Raichu to deal with Charizard, so it feels almost like an auto loss if you hit the Charizard. A lot of the stage 2 decks are just popular right now, and they're really good. Which makes Miraidon not as good because it can't hit that high numbers that it used to be able to with Dynamotors and the Raichu and things like that. But Miraidon's still a good pick, I feel like. If you end up hitting, these Regidrago matchups, the Raging Bolt matchups, and the Lugia matchups, and the Palkia stuff, you have a good time. But if you hit Polt, Gardevoir, and Zard, not so much. So that's why Miraidon is down here in the B tier. couple other Palkia decks. I would like to put Palkia Noctowl in B tier. I think Palkia Noctowl is not a bad deck by any means. I just don't think it's a great deck. I think there's a better way to play Palkia, which being Palkia Dusknoir, which I'm going to put in the A tier. We've seen Stefan Ivanov really pilot Palkia Dusknoir to a really good finish in top 4, and I think there's not really any reason to play Palkia Noctowl over Palkia Dusknoir. You can play a couple of Noctowl in the deck and still play the Dusknoir package and have it work and be fine. I just feel like Palkia Dusknoir has a lot more cooler plays that I can do into these Dragapult, Charizard, and Gardevoir decks that Palkia Noctowl just doesn't have, unfortunately. Speaking of some of the other newer kind of innovations, I'm going to put Terapagos in A tier. Now, I think Terapagos had a really good showing. It had a great conversion rate for Dortmund and for Joinville. It was not even on the showing of the day 1 decks at Dortmund, and then it had one of the highest conversion rates into day 2. So I feel like Terapagos going forward, now that like Tord's kind of played it a little bit, we've seen a lot of lists, and it's been out for some time, we kind of have figured out a good starting point for Terapagos, and I think that's why I'm going to put this in A tier. I think a lot of people are going to take Tord's list and change it or just run with Tord's list and really understand the matchups of this deck and go really far with it. It's a very high skill ceiling deck and a skill floor as well to play, but if you know the deck and you know how it functions and you know what you're doing, you can really win the whole regional playing this Terapagos deck. I think it's a really good deck. It's just, it's a lot of like, you need to know what to grab, when to grab it. Kind of like how Charizard is at some point in times. A couple other decks I would like to talk about here. I do think Stall is in the A tier position. I think it has a lot of good matchups going into Louisville. I think it has a good time into Charizard, into Dragapult even sometimes, Raging Bolt. But I just feel like Stall is one of those decks where you really got to know your outs and what you're doing to perform very well, but I feel like it is a very good pick as well. Dragapult Charizard, I'm going to put in B tier. I think Dragapult Charizard is just not the way to be playing it right now. I don't think it's a bad deck by any means. It's either just play Dragapult or play Charizard, because there's two very different decks right now, and I understand where the Dragapult Charizard wants to go, but I do feel like sometimes it's like, okay, we're using our Rare Candy into Dragapult, also into Charizard, and then we got to find, you know, this card, and you don't have the Pidgeot engine to do that, which doesn't feel as good, and you aren't playing the Dracloaks to be able to Recon Directive on top of that, and just a lot of different clunky things kind of going on with that deck, I feel like. A couple other decks here. I would also like to put Regidrago in A tier. I think Regidrago is a very good deck. It's consistent. It has a lot of cool plays it can make. You have the Lost Impact, you have the Dragapult in the deck, you can play Hisuian Gudra, you have the Kyurem, you have the Haxorus for different matchups. Just Regidrago has a lot of options. It's like the Mewtwo and Mew tag team deck where you just kind of have a lot of things for different matchups, so it feels like it's not a bad deck to play because you kind of have an answer to everything a little bit, which feels really nice. Raging Bolt Ogerpon I feel like is the best aggro deck going into this format. I feel like Raging Bolt Ogerpon is a deck that if you've been playing it and you know how the deck functions and you know how it works and you know the very high skill ceiling plays it can make, Raging Bolt will take you there. It will take you far. Raging Bolt's also the deck that's kind of the newcomer deck. A lot of people are gravitated towards it because it has a very low skill floor. It's very easy to pick up. Teal Dance, the energy's on. Sawdust, attach, blow up. That's the deck in kind of a simple, quick nutshell, but at the same time, the good Raging Bolt players that have been playing it for a while, I feel like will take the deck the distance, which I feel like is important to mention as well. Dragapult Pidgeot, or just Dragapult with the Dracloak engine. S tier, I mean, I think this deck is great. I think it has a lot of options. It has a lot of cool plays it can make. You have a lot of just disruption in the deck on top of control of the board state, on top of constant pressure, on top of like hand disruption, on top of just... There's a lot the deck has going for it. You have the Sparkling Crystal to make your attacks cheaper if you don't want to play the Sparkling Crystal, and like you just have so much. Like the deck is so interchangeable right now. If someone were to sit down and be like, I'm not playing Ryu Kakata's version with the Dracloaks, but I'm playing Dragapult Pidgeot, I would not be shocked. The deck is still really good. The Dragapult Pidgeot deck's really good. The Ryuki Okada version is really, really good. Dragapult is just one of the better decks to play right now, kind of hands down, I feel like. I also would like to put Gardevoir in A tier, but I think it's at the top of A tier. Also, like Raging Bolt's pretty up here. I feel like Drogo's kind of like there. But Gardevoir's at the top of A tier. I feel like Gardevoir has a lot of cool things it can do. I feel like Gardevoir in the right hands will take the distance. You know, I'm thinking of people like Cal Connor. I'm thinking of like even my buddy Nick Del Toro. Like they've been playing Gardevoir for quite some time. So if you've been playing Gardevoir and you know what you are doing, you will go the distance with the deck. The deck is really good. It's rather consistent. You have the Monkey Dory, you have the Drifloons, you have the disruption element with the Fluttermane and the Klefki if you play that. You even have like the secret box stuff going forward if you really want to play that list, and kind of like the Turbo Gardevoir. I just feel like Gardevoir is a really solid deck right now, and with Lugia being so popular, which speaking of Lugia goes into the S tier, with Lugia being so popular, Gardevoir has a pretty okay time into Lugia, I feel like most times. Unless you get Iron Hands, then that doesn't feel too good. But Lugia, I feel like it's a really good deck. You have so many different variants you can play. You have Ruhl's Vist with the Raikou and the normal Lightning Energy, and then you have the list with like more Cinccino's, and then you can play like Weird Deer V. You can play Wellspring Ogerpon and take advantage of energy underdepths. You have Iron Hands with the Legacy Energy, the Skew, the Prize Trade, on top of the Squawk ability to be able to Squawk and Seize. And if you're playing the Wellspring Ogerpon variant, you also just remove the stadium with your Lugia and then get rid of your liabilities like Squawk ability and stuff off your bench in Lumineon, which feels so good. We watched Ethan Wild literally just run their Dragapult opponent off the table with Wellspring Ogerpon EX. So like Lugia is a very good deck. Rahul's list is also very good. Ruhl finishing 9th at Worlds and then 5th at Baltimore and then 2nd at Dortmund with the exact same 60. That doesn't happen a lot in the Pokemon trading card game. Ruhl is a great player, has been playing Lugia for quite some time, and knows that deck very well. But in the same breath, going 9th at Worlds, and then 5th at Baltimore, and then 2nd at Dortmund, with the exact same 60, you just don't do that. Unless the deck is good and the pilot knows what they're doing. Now, I will say, Lugia also has the problem with its worst enemy is itself. But in a best of 3 format, that's not too bad. If you just brick one every 3 games, if you just pick up and win the other 2, which Lugia can do. If Lugia gets set up and double chops, 9 times out of 10, you're just running your opponent off the table entirely. So Lugia, I think, is a very great pick going into Louisville. But with that being said, let's talk about Charizard Pidgeot. I think Charizard Pidgeot's also a great pick, but I gotta put it at like the tippy top of A tier. I think Charizard Pidgeot is one of those decks where, like, it's really good. I think it has a lot of cool plays it can make. It has the Dusknoir stuff plus Briar. I'm just not quite sold on it because I feel like a lot of the times Lugia can kind of just get you out of the game pretty quick, or Dragapult can run you off the table really early if you can't just rare candy into your stuff fast enough, which feels bad. But Charizard is just Charizard. Rare candy into Pidgeot, rare candy into Charizard, punch face. Get the Briar, hit harder, take 3 prize cards or 2 prize cards or whatever, and just win the game. Like, Charizard has a lot of cool plays. I'm really torn between the bottom of S tier and the top of A. So I'm going to put it at the top of A just because I feel like Charizard, I feel like one will get into top 8, and I feel like it will do well. Just part of me doesn't quite feel super sold on it yet with, like, the Dusknoir stuff and all that. Iron Thorns EX. I'm going to put Iron Thorns at the top of B as well, above Goldango here. I think Iron Thorns is kind of like a matchup roulette type deck, and I've always thought that really, like, if you hit Lugias, you're having a great time. If you hit Charizard, you're doing pretty okay. You hit Palkas, you're doing fine. But if you hit Dragapults, it gets a little tough. If you hit, Gardevoir, it gets a little tough. You hit Roaring Moons, you get cooked. And, like, if you hit, like, Pidgeot Control and they're playing 3 Mimikyu in the deck, you don't have 3 Canceling Cologne, and you can't Lost City them away, you're going to get cooked. Like, Iron Thorns is one of those decks where if you're hitting Lugias and Charizards and Palkias all day long, you're having a great time. But if you hit, like I said, if you hit Raging Bolt, or you hit like a Dragapult, or like Chempow's pretty okay, Roaring Moon and stuff, you're not having a great time. And I feel like Iron Thorns is one of those decks where it's kind of hit or miss. I feel like it's not a bad pick going into Louisville. It's just, you really have to make sure that it's a meta call deck, right? And Iron Thorns has a lot of cool things that it can do with the initialization ability, shutting off your, like, all abilities of, like, basically anything that's not a future type Pokemon, being that Summoning Star, the Quick Search, the Infernal Rain, the Psychic Embrace, the Star Portal, the Legacy Star with Drogo as well. Iron Thorns has a lot of good matchups, but once again, Iron Thorns' problem also kind of is the same as Lugia, where its worst enemy is itself, because sometimes Iron Thorns just doesn't get set up. Sometimes you get 1 or 2 thorns, you whiff on Energy Lotto, and you whiff on the head flip on Pokemon Catcher and Crushing Hammers and stuff. So it's kind of a hit or miss deck, but that is what I would say is going to have to be for the Louisville Regional tier list here. I feel like I've really kind of hit the mark on a lot of these decks, and I'm really excited to attend the Louisville Regionals. And speaking of that, if you're attending the Louisville Regionals as well, let me know down in the comments below. I want to hear if you guys are going to this regional, and if you are and you don't mind sharing what deck you are playing, also would be super cool. Once again, I'm between 2 decks, one of those being Lugia V-Star, and the other one, a little bit of a secret sauce that we'll keep secret. So, if you guys are in the content I've been making stuff for the channel, don't forget to leave a like, smash the subscribe button. I will appreciate it. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace!